Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete and detailed Varka guide. Varka is the newest 5-star unit released in version Luna 5 or 6.4, the Grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius that has been long awaited by many, myself included. In today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about Varka, talking about his best builds, teams, weapons, constellations, a review and showcase of the character, and much more. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Alright, so starting things off, what does Varka actually do? Well, Varka is a character whose kit revolves around his elemental skill, Windbound Execution. This is an ability that can be tapped or held. Holding it is just for exploration mainly. You can charge it up and do like a big leap forward, but pressing the skill is how you're supposed to use it for actual combat. In fact, once pressed, Varka will leap forward, do a hit of anemo damage, and then switch into the Sturm Undrang mode. I probably butchered the pronunciation, but basically an enhanced state where your normal and charge attacks will do more damage, and you won't be able to plunge. Inside of your skill, Varka will have his left claymore deal anemo damage, and his right claymore will deal elementally infused damage based on the elements in your party of either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo. And while if you have multiple different of these elements, your claymore's infusion priority will be pyro, hydro, electro, then cryo in that order. However, because of one of Varka's passive talents that we will talk about shortly, this will very rarely be the case with Varka, as he's usually played alongside just one of these four elements. And so inside of Varka's skill, his normal attacks will be dealing hits of this elementally infused damage through his right claymore and anemo damage hits through his left claymore. Now inside of this state, Varka's skill will change to a new special elemental skill that will start on cooldown, but have its cooldown reduced by 0.5 seconds or 1 second if Varka's Hexerai passive is active, meaning if you run him with another Hexerai unit and have completed your witch's homework, every normal attack up to 15 times. And this special skill will deal 2 pretty big hits of damage, one that is anemo and another hit that is stronger of whichever element is infused in your other claymore, so pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo. Additionally, you can opt to do a special charge attack instead of your special skill if you want to, and this will consume one of your skill charges and not cost stamina, with this one doing 4 smaller hits instead, with its scaling being a bit higher but being a bit slower to use than your special skill, with both being viable, and I'll discuss this more in the next section. For now, what you need to know though is that inside of your skill, you'll deal elemental damage from your claymores. One will be pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo, and the other will be anemo. Your normal and charge attacks will deal a lot of damage and will definitely add up, and you'll get bursts of damage through your special skill or special charge attack inside of your skill, with a cooldown of the skill going down with every normal attack. I also want to highlight that you do have 2 charges of your special skill, meaning that you don't have to use your first special skill or charge attack right away. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually Varka's really important passive talents. Firstly, Dawnwind's March is a big one. This is one that has 2 parts. Firstly, Varka will get anemo damage bonus and then elemental damage bonus of either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo, depending on which one is in your party. If there are multiple types, you will only get one, following the Feck priority once again, with the exact damage bonus scaling on Varka's attack, with it capping out at 2500 attack, where he will gain 25% anemo damage bonus and 25% either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo damage bonus. Now, additionally, the second part of this effect is going to be the most important. This is one that will shape your team building, and why I've been saying that you typically will only run Varka with one other element outside of anemo. And what it does is the following. When there are 2 anemo characters in the team and 2 characters of the same element among pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo, then Varka will have basically all of the damage inside of his skill, namely the normal attacks, charge attacks, special charge attacks, and special skills he uses inside of his elemental skills state, increased to deal much more damage. In fact, if both of these conditions are met, the damage will be increased to 220% of its original value, effectively being a 2.2 times multiplier to his damage here, which is really a big deal. This is a huge increase in scaling that will make Varka's damage much higher if you have 2 anemo characters in your party, and then either 2 pyro, 2 hydro, 2 electro, or 2 cryo. If only one of these 2 conditions are met, however, say you only have 2 anemo characters or 2 of another element, but not both of these conditions, then Varka's damage will be increased to only 140% of its original damage, so a 1.4 times multiplier, which is better than nothing, but definitely a lot lower than the 2.2 times multiplier you will get if both of these conditions are met. And so it is crucial, because this is a multiplier to Varka's scalings, to build his team around 2 anemo characters and then 2 of one of these 4 other elements. Now, outside of that, Varka also has another passive talent that will give him damage percent as you trigger swirls on any character, stacking up to 4 times and getting up to 1 stack per second per character, but Varka himself can even stack it up, so don't worry, with each stack giving you 7.5 damage bonus, capping out at 30% with 4 stacks to Varka's normal attacks, charge attacks, special charge attacks, and special skill, so just a nice bit of bonus damage percent. And obviously, we already talked about his Hexerai passive that will be active if your party includes 2 Hexerai characters, including Varka, who is one, so just one other, and have completed the witch's homework. And now lastly for Varka's elemental burst, the reason I didn't talk about it yet is because it's honestly usually not worth using. While the animation is really cool and I wish it were better, the fact of the matter is that it'll do 2 hits of damage, the second one being a Nemo and the first one being of whichever element, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo, is present in your party. Now while that sounds cool, the problem is that the damage you do in your burst isn't buffed by notably your very strong passive that'll give almost all of your damage a 2.2 times multiplier that we talked about earlier. And so this just not buffing your burst paired with its long animation time make it just not worth using, even though it does look really cool. With that said, I also want to mention that even though it's not written anywhere, using your burst technically extends your skill's stance's duration, so you can stay inside of your stance longer, but this still isn't enough to make it generally worth using. Lastly, for Varka's talent priority, his elemental skill will be really what matters. You should maximize this. It is going to be all of his damage, all of the normal attacks, charge attacks, special skill, and special charge attacks that you do inside of your skill. Well, scale with this talent. Your skill's normal attacks have their own scaling here and not with your normal attack talent level, so just level your skill and ignore your normal attacks, and you can also ignore your burst unless you plan on using it. If you want to use it as a panic button or because it looks cool, you can level it as well at a lower priority, but it's not recommended, and in general, just level his skill as your #1 priority, and then you can level Varka's character level as well and ignore everything else. Alright, now next up, let's talk about how to get the most value out of your Varka regarding his playstyle, advanced tips, and combo information. So firstly, while there is some nuance to his kit and how exactly you're going to be playing him, the actual setup and overall idea is very straightforward. You want to use all of your support characters' abilities, basically setting up all of your buffs and off-field damage, before then swapping into your Varka using his skill and spending the rest of your field time on him. You will typically spam his normal attacks inside of his skill until your special skill becomes available, then you can either use that or use his special charge attack instead, and you will do this twice per rotation before swapping out of your Varka. Now, there's a lot more nuance here depending on the scenario and combo you choose to do. In fact, now's a good time to mention that Varka's regular charge attacks inside of his skill are pretty good and are going to be a part of some of his optimal combos, and when you are performing them, you can hold a directional input like W on your keyboard in order to make the animation a little bit faster. Additionally, because a lot of Varka's best teams don't run a shielder and because you can get interrupted very easily throughout your combos, it is possible to dash cancel certain normal attack hits like your second or third one, or just whenever you need to in your rotation to avoid getting hit and getting your whole combo canceled. Generally though, this won't be as high DPS as just doing your more standard combos. And before we get into said combos, I do want to quickly mention that regarding Varka's special skill or special charge attack, the enhanced versions he gets inside of his skill, both of these are going to be viable and pretty similar damage wise, in case you're wondering which you should be using. Now, generally speaking though, the special skill will usually be preferred, especially due to its much larger AoE. For those reasons, it can be a lot more convenient to use, it gives you a bit of movement, but mainly it will be beneficial for AoE scenarios. With that said though, the special charge attack is also very similar in strength, especially if you don't need the AoE, and what matters more is if you have certain buffs, like for example, some artifact sets outside of your best one, which we'll talk about in the next section, like Shimanawa's or even Desert Pavilion, that give you a lot of charge attack damage bonus, or maybe your weapon does, or something that favors using your special charge attack over your special skill can make it better for you, and so you should do that in those scenarios. And so because of that, and just in general, both your special skill and special charge attack are very viable, so you can use whichever one makes more sense for you, with the skill being standard, as it does seem to be slightly faster for only a little bit less damage and a much bigger AoE. Now, as far as exact combos are concerned, as mentioned, for most players, you can get a lot of value by just spamming your normal attacks on Varka inside of his skill and using your special skill or charge attack when it becomes available after a normal attack string. This will mean, for example, doing 5 normal attacks into a special skill, into another 4 or 5, and then another skill, and then you can end things off with 2 more normal attacks before swapping out. Because Varka is a character who can extend his rotation a bit due to his skill's duration, you can always add in a few extra normal attack hits at the end if you want more field time or want to extend your rotation for whatever reason. Extra attack speed may allow you to get an extra hit here or there as well, and for the most part, just doing normal attacks and your special skill whenever it's available will give you a lot of value and will only be a few percents behind even very optimized Varka combos, making it something that you can optimize if you want to, and personally I find it fun, but that you definitely don't have to. And so if you want to keep things simple and don't want to overcomplicate it, then you can just spam your normal attacks on Varka and use your special skill or charge attack twice in a rotation after each normal attack string, and weaving in a few extra normals before swapping out optionally. Now, regarding a bit more optimized and advanced combos, while these are optional and still evolving, as a lot of characters, as I mentioned in my last video, have their optimal combos discovered even months after the release, for now, I'm going to include include at least some examples on screen of combos that can work for you and the one that worked the best for me if you want to take your Varka gameplay a step further. And typically, for your information, these involve mix and matching Varka's charge attack with either N1 or sometimes N2 and also his N4. Once again though, these are optional and the exact combo that works best for you will depend on many factors like your team and the buffs you're getting. I also want to mention that if you're running something like Desert Pavilion, you should start your rotation off by doing a charge attack, and also that Varka does have certain combos he can do if you need to dash to avoid getting your combo interrupted and taking damage, dashing when you need to after certain normal attacks in your combo. Once again though, Varka's exact combo can depend and is customizable based on the situation. Personally, I found the top combo I included to be my standard go-to and best performing option for me, but again, combo optimizations may still be discovered in the future, and also even just doing his full normal attack strings as mentioned earlier will be your standard and very simple but high performing combo that will only be a bit worse and is very simple. Now next up, I wanted to include a little section talking about my honest thoughts on Varka as a character and give you an overall review of him, his power level, and some of his pros and cons. So firstly, I want to preface this by saying that Varka is a character who's been very long awaited by many, myself included, and just as far as playstyle goes, as we saw previously, he is someone who has interesting and flexible combos and optimizations when it comes to his actual gameplay that I find very satisfying. And while Varka has a few strengths that I will talk about, he also has some weaknesses, with one main one that I want to highlight first and foremost, which is just regarding his damage level. In fact, Varka is a character whose power level right now in his current best team does not live up to the standard set by a lot of the recent additions to the game, recent DPSs that have been raising the power level. As I've talked about before, I believe the game's power level has been going up kind of more rapidly than it used to in the past, especially since Natlan and characters like Mawika. Recent carries, namely all the lunar ones like Flynn's, Nefer, and Zibai, with their dedicated supports and teams, have been at the face of the meta alongside the previous Archon, and have been steadily raising the expected power level of what new DPS characters should be in order to be strong and at the top of the meta. Now, as far as Varka's damage is concerned, it's kind of reminiscent of a character that would come out maybe near the start of Natlan, where his damage as of right now, and this will vary, he's someone who gets a lot better with vertical investment like his signature weapon, and I'll talk about that very shortly, but as of right now at a baseline, his damage, while it won't be as bad as some older units, it won't be as good as a lot of the new ones, and so he's kind of in an awkward mid-range, where he's not a bad character, but he's also not an amazing one as of right now. So meta-wise, given a lot of the kind of power level increase we've been getting, especially with new carries and new teams, I think Varka falls a bit short, if I'm being very honest, so I want to make that clear. With that said, there is some silver lining, so let me talk about it because I do also just like the character and want to be very honest. Firstly, Varka is a character, as I said, that gets better with vertical investment. His signature weapon is genuinely crazy for him and better than any 5-star support he has right now, and additionally, it does seem very likely that future Hexarai units that synergize with Varka, right, a specific dedicated support for him, like maybe Nicole or Alice, or someone in the Hexarai, could come out and help elevate his teams. While right now he has supports that synergize with him, like Venti and Durin, none of them are that big of a damage increase to him. They're honestly really good but very replaceable, like Venti, for example, who's great, can be replaced with Sucrose or another Anemo non-Hexarai unit, and Durin, while he will be your best option and is overall a good support, like I do think Durin's great, is also replaceable with a lot of different Pyro 4-stars even, especially if you have Constellations on them. The upgrade from a Constellated Pyro 4-star support to Durin is not going to be as big as a lot of the recent dedicated supports, in fact nowhere near, like an Escoffier for Skirk, a Lauma for Nefer, or an Inefa for Flynn's. This is in part because Durin's amazing res shred is a bit less needed for Varka because you already get 40% res shred through the Verdescent Venerer set from your Nemo support. He doesn't have a support that comes and elevates his teams the way that a lot of recent carries do. Now, I'm being honest, this might change, right? Maybe Nicole, maybe Alice, maybe someone comes and gives him that buff, but you would still then need to pull for it, and this is only speculation, so only time will tell. Oh, and while this dedicated support naturally would probably increase his damage level a lot, it would also make sense if they gave him, say, a shield, because of the fact that Varka right now doesn't have interruption resistance, so sometimes you have to dash cancel certain normal attack hits or just get your combo interrupted because of the fact that his premium team obviously doesn't have a shielder. As of right now though, if I'm just talking about power level before I get into some other pros and cons, his power level and his premium teams are going to perform worse than the meta premium teams that exist right now, and more similar to the power level you would expect near the start of Natlan, or maybe a Nodcry DPS without their dedicated support. Now, I do also want to reiterate that because he gets better with vertical investment, in practice you might find that he feels better for you if you get his signature signature weapon, maybe even Constellations for him, or Constellations for a character like Durin and his signature weapon. Things like that, Varka can actually make use of quite nicely, especially Varka's signature and early Constellations. Investing in Varka himself will be bigger than getting his supports. His signature weapon is better than any 5-star support you can get for him. So do keep that in mind. Vertical investment does make him stronger. Still not better than the strongest teams with their vertical investment, but it does mean that he will get more out of investing in himself and vertical upgrades than, say, upgrading your Anemo or Pyro support as of right now. Regarding his teams, he does have a lot of flexibility because you're running him with another Anemo character, and then you can choose an element between Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, which can help against certain shield bosses, elemental shields, or content that needs specific elements. This is definitely an upside, but the main catch is that as of right now, his Pyro teams are ahead, like they are just the best teams you can make with him, and this is especially true if you don't have, say, really premium alternatives like Escoffier Shenhe for Cryo, although even then a Pyro team will be better, and this may even be amplified if, say, Nicole, whose Pyro vision we saw is actually a character that can be used with Varka, then Pyro might be even further ahead, but there is some flexibility there, which is cool, although you do have to keep in mind his team building restrictions through his passives. And the fact that Pyro teams are just better by a decent amount is definitely a downside though, because it can make his team building feel even more restrictive if you're trying to build the strongest team. With that said, Varka can also use a lot of different 4-star characters quite efficiently, like Bennett, off-field Pyros, notably with Constellations, and even many Anemo supports, although there aren't the most Hexarai choices there outside of Sucrose, but she is quite strong. And so this leaves me in a weird spot. As far as meta goes, if you're wondering if you should pull Varka just purely for meta DPS reasons, then no, I would not recommend him. With that said, his power level is very much better than bad, but worse than great. He's someone who is kind of just okay, and I think he's awaiting future dedicated supports, Hexarai units, and things like that. If you like him, enjoy his playstyle, his customizable combos, and all that, then he might be the right character for you. Obviously, prioritize what you enjoy, right? Maybe even waiting for Varka for a while, etc., etc. Personally, I have a lot of fun with him, although the current Abyss, for example, is absolute hell for him because there's so much lunar shilling right now that Varka in this Abyss can feel much more difficult to use than usual, so that's kind of annoying, but it obviously depends on what enemy matchups we're facing, as he can get through a lot of elemental restrictions, but not really like lunar reaction ones because of the way you build his teams. Personally, as far as his power level goes, I'd wait and see till the future though, see what Nicole, Alice, maybe even Lohen do, like we don't know, and it does seem like his Escoffier, his Inefa, or his Lauma, his dedicated support is not out yet, and so he definitely might get stronger, but again, this is just speculation, maybe I'm coping, so please wait and see, don't just take my word for it. I'm hopeful there, maybe for his rerun, although truthfully, even then, not only would you have to pull for another character, but we don't even know how much they'd elevate Varka, so it might be a big deal, it might not, so I'm trying to be like very cautious here, so wait and see, obviously, but as of right now, he's a character who's fun, decent, but not amazing, not meta, and not a recommended pull, just someone you can get if you like him and his playstyle. So obviously don't feel forced to pull, but if you like him and his playstyle, then we're gonna show you how to actually get the most value out of your Varka, make him as strong as you possibly can, and cover everything you need to know about him in the coming sections of this guide. All right, now with that out of the way, let's talk about how to actually build your Varka. So first off, let's start by talking about Varka's artifact sets, and it is pretty straightforward. Varka's best and signature set is going to be a day card from Rising Winds, a new artifact set that was recently released, made for Hexarai units like Varka. As long as you completed your Witch's homework and damage opponents with basically anything, a normal attack, charge attack, skill, or burst, you will have full uptime of all the stats that this set will give you for a total of 43% attack and 20% crit rate. This is a lot of stats that will buff all of Varka's damage and will have good uptime, making it your standard and best set for Varka that you should typically farm for. It's also a set that some of his supports, like namely Durin, can use, so it may be efficient for you in that regard as well. Generally though, it'll just be his standard and best set. With that said, I want to highlight that there are some other sets that are similar in strength if you don't have this set farmed already. Firstly, 4-piece Shimenawas and 4-piece Desert Pavilion are two artifact sets that are very strong alternatives for Varka. In fact, while this will depend on your stats, teams, and a few different factors, both of these sets will typically only be around 5% or so behind his signature set, which genuinely make them very viable. Both of these sets will give you normal and charge attack damage, which Varka appreciates greatly, and also incentivizing him to use his special charge attacks. Outside of that, Shimenawas will drain some of your energy for this damage buff, but that doesn't really matter because Varka doesn't want to use his burst anyways. With that said, the buff uptime is only 10 seconds with the Shimenawas, but this should be enough time to do good damage on Varka, provided you aren't too slow with your combo. Desert Pavilion, on the other hand, will give you pretty similar stats, also weaving in some attack speed, which Varka appreciates. Just be sure to start your combo off with a charge attack if you are running Desert Pavilion to get the buff. Outside of that, if you are playing Farina with Varka, then Marishusi Hunter becomes a viable set, being very similar in strength to his signature, allowing you to choose whichever one you have that has better substats if you are playing Varka with Farina. With that said, other sets like 4-piece Gladiator or 4-piece Echoes are viable too, as these sets will give you some attack and normal attack damage bonus as well, which are a big portion of Varka's damage, making the sets viable, although they will be a bit worse. With that said, if you have none of these good 4-piece sets, you can also mix and match 2-piece sets that give you relevant stats like attack percent, Maréchaussée, or any elemental damage bonus of the respective element you're infusing your Varka with. Oh, and I also wanted to mention somewhere that you can technically run like any of the like elemental damage specific sets that you may have farmed previously. If your Varka is infused with that specific element, they all like can work for him, but they won't be quite as good as his best options that I talked about earlier. So I wanted to mention them as viable, but generally not recommended and more niche. Lastly, regarding Verdescent Veneer, this is a set that's recommended for supportive Anemo characters, so mainly the other Anemo unit in your team, to reduce the resistance of whatever element you're swirling and increase your team's DPS thusly. Overall, Varka's artifact choice is very straightforward. His signature set will be his best, followed closely by Desert Pavilion and Shimenawa's, and Maréchaussée in teams with Farina become comparable to his signature set. Next up, for the stats you're looking for on Varka, here it is super easy. In fact, the stats you're looking for on every piece are going to be crit damage, crit rate, and attack percent. Crit damage and crit rate will be your best and most valuable substats, followed by attack percent, and that's basically it. Because Varka isn't triggering reactions outside of the occasional swirl, Elemental Mastery doesn't do much for him, and Energy Recharge is also not needed, as we saw earlier, because you are not using his burst, despite it looking cool, and I kinda wish you did, but it's not optimal, so you do not need Energy Recharge. For those reasons, he is very straightforward to build, looking for crit on every piece, and attack percent. As far as your main stats are concerned, look for attack percent on your sands, crit on your circlet, either crit damage or crit rate, whichever one you need more of, being sure to factor in the crit rate you're getting from your signature artifact set, 20%, if you are using it. For Varka's Goblet though, here's where you actually have some options. In fact, as far as this Goblet is concerned, Varka can either go for an attack percent Goblet or a damage bonus Goblet of the element that he's infusing his second sword with, so Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo. This is because most of his damage will be of that element, and so going for a damage bonus Goblet of that type is viable as well. Now, which is better for you will depend on the external buffs your Varka is getting from his teammates, his weapon, and even his artifacts. If you are getting a lot of attack, for example, with Bennett and the Pyro Resonance in a Pyro team, which will be pretty common, then damage bonus can actually be better for you, whereas if you're getting a lot of damage bonus, like in a Hydro team with Farina's Burst, or if you're running an alternative artifact set like Shimenawa's or Desert Pavilion, then on the contrary, attack percent will gain value. This will also depend on your weapon though. If your weapon gives you a lot of attack or gives you a lot of damage, then again, the other one will become more valuable, so it will vary from case to case. With that said though, to keep things simple, both attack percent and damage bonus will be very strong, and so you typically can choose based on your substats. Attack percent being the quote-unquote standard because it works in every team and is just always good, but a damage bonus Goblet can be very similar and potentially slightly better, especially if you get a lot of external attack percent, so be sure to factor in what buffs you're gaining depending on your team, weapon, and artifacts. Although this can change with his second constellation, but more on that later. Lastly, if you're having trouble, decide between an attack or damage bonus Goblet, depending on your team, artifacts, weapons, and everything, you can choose based on your substats because both will be viable, or you can even refer to the Genshin optimizer, which I'll link in the description down below. Alright, now next up, let's talk about Varka's best weapons. Now, here there are a few different options that I want to cover. Firstly, as you probably have heard by now, and as I've somewhat touched on previously in the video, Varka's signature weapon is really strong for him. It is a weapon that'll give you a 608 base attack and 33% crit rate, on top of also having an effect that will increase basically all of his damage. In fact, you will get 10% attack speed, on top of also getting damage bonus that will stack up as you do normal attacks, elemental skills, or charge attacks, up to a maximum of 30%. Additionally, if your party has the Hexerai Secret Right effect, then these stacks will also give you crit damage for up to 30% crit damage as well. And so this weapon will give you a ton of stats. You can stack it up very easily as Varka in almost all of his optimal teams, as we'll talk about in the team section later, will have the sort of Hexerai Resonance active, so you'll just get a lot of crit damage, damage bonus, crit rate, attack speed, and have a good base attack as well, making this just a great stat stick for Varka. This weapon will be around a 15 to 25% increase compared to other 5-star stat sticks, and around a 30% increase compared to his free-to-play 4-star options, so it is a really good increase in damage for Varka depending on what other options you have available. For those reasons, I think it's a really strong signature weapon, but obviously don't feel forced to get it. It is a nice option, but not mandatory. Now, as far as other weapons are concerned, here are some other good ones that you can use. Firstly, other 5-star stat sticks can all work nicely for Varka. Mawika's signature is going to be great for him, and typically his next best option, followed by other strong 5-star stat sticks like Beacon of the Reed Sea and Redhorn Stone Thresher as great options. Outside of that, Varka's best best 4-star option will typically be the Battle Pass weapon, Serpent Spine. Serpent Spine is a weapon I've talked about on almost any Claymore character because it gives you a lot of crit rate and damage bonus through its effect. Its low base attack is usually made up for by the fact that a lot of Varka's best teams will have Bennett or some attack buffer, making the stats that this weapon gives you very useful. Now, with that in mind, I want to highlight that with Varka in particular, because he's going to spend so much time on field doing normal attacks, you do run the risk of losing stacks on your Serpent Spine. For those reasons, its exact value and how strong it is will depend on number 1, its refinement level, getting a lot stronger with refinement, and number 2, on the exact amount of stacks that you can maintain on Varka, because you'll stack up the damage bonus from its effect kind of over time. And note that you can pre-stack it in the Abyss if you wait before starting the chamber, but lose a stack every time you take damage. However many times you get hit will lower your total amount of stacks and lower the value and damage bonus you're gaining from this weapon. And so its exact value will depend. Obviously, it's really good if you can have good stacks, and worse if you can't, but it'll still be, just on average and in general, a solid choice and your best 4-star option. I also want to point out that if you are running a shielder, which isn't the case in a lot of Varka's teams, but you can, then this weapon will gain even more value as you can be protected from losing stacks. But it's basically always a good weapon. Like, Serpent Spine is great, it's your best 4-star, and while its value will depend on your stack uptime and your refinement level, in its best cases, it can be even potentially your second best option, and just in general, it's very competitive with other 5-stars, but again, your exact performance with this weapon may vary. Outside of that, basically any 5-star stat stick can work, like Fang, Verdict, Wolf's Gravestone, Unforged, or even Song of Broken Pines. Because all of these weapons give you attack and or crit and maybe some bonus stats through their effects, they're all just good stat stick options that you can use if you already have them on your account, and they will all be pretty solid. Outside of that, for some other weapons you can use, firstly, Talking Stick is technically viable, but it's not usually recommended to choose this weapon from the Battle Pass. But if you have it, Varka can use it, notably with Bennett, but typically for a Battle Pass Claymore, you'll be choosing Serpent Spine for your account and Varka. Lastly, for some other options, if you don't have any of the 5-star stat sticks that I mentioned, free-to-play options include Tidal Shadow, the Melusine Sword, Blackcliff Slasher, and Earthshaker. All of these can be fine and have different upsides. Tidal Shadow is kind of the standard for just a lot of attack, but it does require your active character to be healed. So in teams with Bennett, for example, because Bennett won't heal you when you're too high HP, this will require you actually taking damage to get good uptime on its effect. If you can reliably get healed though, this will be your go-to free-to-play option. Otherwise, it's not as strong, and overall, it's just a fine choice. For the Melusine Sword, this requires you to help Melusines, but if you do, even though the energy recharge is useless on him, the high base attack and up to 48% attack from the effect makes it unconditionally viable and pretty solid. And Blackcliff Slasher, which you can get from the Star Glitter shop, will just give you a lot of crit damage and potentially attack if you defeat opponents, making it another viable choice. Lastly, Earthshaker gives you attack and can incentivize you to use your enhanced skill, provided you are triggering pyro reactions. All of these options can be fine and pretty comparable in strength. I say Tidal Shadow will be the go-to if you can reliably get the uptime on its effect through having a good healer, and if not, it'll be a weapon like Blackcliff Slasher or the Melusine Sword / Earthshaker, as we'll see in the weapon ranking coming up shortly. All of them are fine, but they won't be quite as good as the other great stat sticks we talked about. Now, for a visual representation of this, I'm going to put a weapon ranking on screen now to help give you guys an idea of what to expect with each weapon. Now, a few big things I want to mention, as always, is that weapon rankings will vary heavily based on many factors like your artifacts, buffs, rotation, and in Varka's case, his combos as well. So keep in mind that each weapon's performance may vary based on many things. Also, for weapons like Serpent Spine, as you can see, if you get more stacks, it would even rank higher in this list, and worse if you get less stacks. There is just an average assumed here, but for example, with a shielder, it can be even stronger. And for the most part, you can see that his best weapon is going to be a signature, followed by some amazing 5-star stat sticks and Serpent Spine, and then he has a bunch of viable free-to-play options as well. And a huge thanks to Meowtus for the weapon ranking on screen. Alright, now next up for Varka's Constellations, here's what you need to know. Firstly, Varka's C1 is one that will give him two main things. Firstly, when he uses his skill, he will immediately obtain a charge of his special elemental skill, basically allowing you to get another free one in your rotation. Additionally, as you use your skill, Varka also gains something called the Lyrical Liberation effect, which will enhance one of your special skills or special charge stacks to make it deal 200% of its original damage, which honestly makes it a pretty nice C1. You get an extra charge of your special skill or special charge stack if you decide to use it that way, while also increasing the damage of your first one for a bit more front-loaded burst damage, making it a pretty solid C1. Next, for Varka's second constellation, this is one that will give Varka an extra hit of Anemo damage when he uses his special skill or his special charge stack. When this happens, Varka will deal another hit of AoE Anemo damage equal to 800% of Varka's attack, making Varka deal more Anemo damage, and this is a constellation that, because it gives him more Anemo damage in his kit as well, synergizes with certain things like Faruzan, attack goblets, and even makes anemo damage bonus goblets viable, depending on your substats. Next up, for Varka's C3 and 5, these will increase his talent levels, C3 being of his elemental skill, so it's actually a pretty strong C3 because his skill is all of his damage, and then his burst will be leveled through C5, which doesn't really matter. C4 will give Varka and his teammates elemental damage bonus after Varka triggers a swirl reaction, giving you 20% anemo damage bonus and 20% elemental damage bonus of whatever other element you swirled, which is a nice bonus both to Varka's personal damage and also the damage of your off-field supports, so it's nice for a C4 but nothing crazy. And lastly, Varka's C6 is a pretty good one. In fact, Varka's C6 will make it to where when he uses his special skill, he will get a free special charge attack, and on the contrary, when he uses his special charge attack, he will get a free special skill. This allows him to effectively use both of them, getting a free cast of whichever one you didn't use. So a free special skill every time you do a special charge attack, and a free special charge attack every time you do a special skill, with this effect not triggering off of the bonus one you're getting, so it doesn't like go infinite, but I think you get the point. And then this Constellation will also have another effect that will enhance Varka's Ascension passive, making this also give him stacks of crit damage, 20% per stack for a maximum of 80% crit damage, which is appreciated. With that said, while Varka has some good constellations, he definitely doesn't need any, so don't feel forced to get some. Now with that said, as far as early stopping points go, both Varka's C1 and C2 are strong. They can be around a 15 to 20% damage increase, so they're both pretty good, but again, they're not needed. As far as early constellations versus his signature weapon goes, while as always it depends on what your alternative weapon options are, Varka's signature is so stacked for him and so strong, as we saw in like the weapon section earlier, that it usually will be the better option. Now again, it does depend on banners and stuff, and weapon banners can be annoying to pull on, but Varka's signature weapon is really strong for him and also really good for many characters, so it's a good claymore overall that you can use on many different characters, and especially on Varka. How big of an increase his signature weapon will be will depend on what your alternative is, being a bigger increase if you're upgrading from say a 4-star weapon, and still being a sizable one, albeit a smaller one, if you already have a good 5-star, but it's still a pretty big deal, and generally I'd recommend his signature weapon, his R1, over Constellation. Alright, now next up, let's get into one of the most important sections of the video, talking about Varka's best teams and synergies. Now, when building Varka's teams, it will be pretty straightforward. In fact, what you're looking for is a team comprised of 2 anemo units, so Varka and 1 other, and then either 2 Pyro, 2 Hydro, 2 Electro, or 2 Cryo characters. And ideally having another Hexerai unit in there as well, in order to fulfill all of the requirements in his passives. Having 2 anemo and 2 of another Fek element will greatly increase his multipliers, and so it is almost always recommended. Regarding having a Hexerai unit, while Varka's Hexerai passive is nice and worth having for the cooldown reduction, it may not be as vital on its own because Varka also gets a lot of damage from other parts of his kit, like his normal attacks in particular, but it's still worth getting, especially because Varka also synergizes with other Hexerai units, enables their Hexerai passive when they're ran together, and synergizes with other things like, for example, his signature weapon, and so overall it's just recommended and nice for his combos, but it isn't as mandatory as his other passives, as there are a few teams that can be ran without it. But generally, you'll almost always have another Hexerai. And so for the most part, building a team around him will be pretty structured and straightforward. And so let's go over the best options for all of his supports of these different elements and some example teams. So firstly, if you're wondering about Hexerai units, and I think it'd be a good time to reiterate this, there is a good chance that Varka gets future supports that synergize with him and maybe elevate him further, as I mentioned earlier in the video. While this is purely speculation as of right now, so don't get your hopes up, there is a good chance that he synergizes with at least one of the future Hexerai units like Nicole or Alice. For now though, his best Hexerai synergies are Durin and Venti, followed by Sucrose as the 3 most popular options, and then you can also use Fischl in Electra teams, or Mona especially with C4, oh and technically Klee with C2. All of the characters I named fit within the elements Varka wants in his team, so let's actually talk about that. Firstly, for the Anemo slot, the Anemo support you're running with Varka, you have a few options. Firstly, this Anemo character will be able to run the Verdescent Venerer set regardless of who they are, in order to swirl Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo, and reduce the resistance of that element by 40%, increasing both your Varka's damage as well as your elemental sub DPSs. Additionally, for some character specific things, Venti will be your best and go-to Anemo support option if you have him available. This is because Venti will offer you some nice grouping and personal damage, will also crucially through his Hexerai effect give your Varka 50% damage bonus as you trigger swirls, and that paired with the other elements of his kit and the Verdescent Venerer set make him very powerful. Additionally, if you don't have Venti, you can use other great options. Sucrose works as a solid 4-star who can run Verdescent Venerer, Thrilling Tales, and also through the Hexerai buff give you some damage bonus to your kit as well as she uses her skill and also her burst. Keep in mind that because her burst has a 20-second cooldown, you can use it every other rotation rotation, as unless you have someone else in your team that needs a longer rotation, Varka can keep his rotations pretty short. Now, while these are both the Anemo Hexarai options, there are other just normal Anemo supports you can run as well, like notably Farazan, especially with her Constellations, for a ton of buffs to your Anemo damage, which, yes, for Varka C0 will be a considerable amount less than your elemental damage, typically around a third or so of your damage, but it still adds up because of the buffs that a C6 Farazan can give you, so she's a good option. And other good ones include Aoife, who can run Thrilling Tales, and also the Scroll set, especially if you already have Res Shred from someone like Durin, we'll talk about shortly. So notably, if you have Durin in your team, already get that Res Shred from him, then Aoife can be good on Scroll, or he can also run Verdescent Venerer if not and you need the Res Shred, or a defensive option like Lanyan for a strong shield and Thrilling Tales, or Jean, especially with Constellations if you want a healer. I also want to add that having a shield through a character like Lanyan is quite comfy to not have your combos interrupted and not worry about losing Serpent Spine stacks, for example, if you run that weapon, so she can be a good defensive option if that's something you're looking for. Lastly, other generic Anemo supports can work, like even Kazuha for elemental damage bonus, grouping, and the VV set. And so for your Anemo slot, it is quite flexible, and the same can be said for Pyro as well. Now, for your Pyro options, typically because you're running 2 in your team, right, it's gonna usually be Bennett and one other. Bennett is insanely broken for the reasons I've mentioned in like 50 videos now. He gives you healing and a ton of attack that Varka can use very efficiently. Depending on your investment level and rotation, you may also get some value from snapshotting Bennett's buff on another character like Venti, but even just for Varka, like he gives you so much attack and acts as a healer, so he is a great option for Varka that you should use in your Pyro teams. Afterwards, you should have another like support or sub DPS to work alongside of Varka, deal damage and give you some buffs, and Durin is the best option. Durin is great for Varka because not only is he a Hexarai unit, but he will also just do a lot. Like, especially when he has his Hexarai buff active, Varka will give you a ton of res shred to both Anemo and Pyro inside of his white mode as you are Pyro swirling, while also just having really good personal damage. So you get res shred, good damage, Pyro application, and overall, Durin is just going to be a part of Varka's best teams as of right now. Because of this, Varka's best and kind of premium team right now includes running these Pyro units I just mentioned with another Anemo support, but the slots in these teams are very flexible, so if you don't have any, you can adjust based on what you have. While I would always recommend running Bennett as your one Pyro option, the other one, if you don't have Durin, who will be the best, can be another generic Pyro choice. You can use a character like Mawika. Mawika can work because her burst does a ton of damage, her skill also does pretty good off-field damage and gives you Pyro app, as well as also buffing your damage a bit through her passive, but keep in mind that there are no other Natlan characters in your team, she'll still be a good option. Shangling for some personal off-field damage and also certain buffs with her constellation like Pyro Res Shred from C1 and a bit of Pyro damage bonus from C6. Toma if you want a shielder, especially at C6, because not only is the shield nice, but also if you have a C6, you'll get normal and charge attack damage bonus, which is appreciated. And personally, I really did like Toma for the C6 buff and the comfy shield that allowed me to run my Serpent Spine with a lot less worry and get my combos interrupted a lot less. And you can technically use C6 Chevy as well, and I know this might sound weird because she revolves around overload, like her whole kit wants you to overload, but if you have her C6 specifically, then she can still give you up to a 60% Pyro damage bonus from the C6, as well as some healing through her base kit, which can make her honestly not bad in this team. Again, if you have C6, so viable, but you may want to use her in some overload teams instead, but yeah, it can work. So any of these options or other generic Pyros who have some form of off-field application can work as well. Next up, for the other elements that you can use, while Pyro is the standard, other teams definitely work. First one includes Cryo, and I'm gonna speed this up because I'm noticing that the team section will be really long otherwise. There's a lot of generic Cryos that can work. Iskafi is a great option because she gives you res shred and damage, and then you can also use her burst for some healing. While her res shred isn't the most if you only have 2 cryo characters in your team, it still will add up when paired with everything else in her kit. Other great cryo options include Shenhe, who you should hold your skill on by the way, and she also will give you good buffs. Outside of the 5-star cryos, any other generic option can work, like Rosaria, Layla, Kaya, Ganyu, or others. Oh, and also certain other cryo sustains can work, like Mika for some attack speed or Charlotte for Thrilling Tales, and you can run some supportive artifact sets as well. I also want to mention that if you are running a double cryo team, do keep in mind that you will get some crit rate against cryo affected enemies, 15% to be precise, so you might want to keep that in mind when you are building your Varka. And obviously, like the other resonances that I didn't mention can be useful, notably Pyro, that gives you a 25% attack, but I did want to highlight the crit rate you'd be getting here to make sure you don't overcap on crit rate. Next up, for electro characters you can run, Yansan will be a good attack buffer, getting better with Constellations, and while she has better synergy with other units, you can still get decent uptime on her buffs, again, especially with some Constellations, but you may have to alternate your rotation on Varka a bit and kind of dash around more and move around in between your animations. Also note that Yansan can't trigger scroll in this team, so she can use the Noblesse set instead. And the other main Electro will be Fischl, a Hexerai support who has great off-field damage. Now, outside of these two, you can kind of use whatever. Sara can work to buff Varka and potentially another Electro unit, although she doesn't have the best uptime and you may have to burst every other rotation on her as well, but she can work, and so can other generic off-field Electros like Yai, Beto, or Kuki, but in my testing, Fischl and Yansan have been my favorites. Lastly, for your Hydro options, any generic Hydro off-fielder can work. Farina is going to be naturally good for not only her decent personal damage, but also the big damage bonus that her burst will give your party, although you will need a healer in order to properly stack it up. Because of this, you can either run a Hydro healer option or a Nemo one, although there isn't really any incredibly synergistic healer options for Varka, I guess, unless you have Jean's Constellations that can help. Whatever the case may be though, Farina double Hydro teams can work quite nicely as an alternative for Varka, and other good Hydros include Yelan and Xingqiu for great off-field damage, as well as certain buffs like Yelan giving you damage bonus, and Xingqiu's Constellation giving you Hydro Rest Red, or Mona, especially with C4, for her buffs and supportive Catalyst option. Outside of that, if you're looking for healers, Siegewin, Kokomi, or Barbara can work, and you can technically use a shielder like Dahlia, although my personal favorites have been the more offensive double Hydro slots. For some example teams now, while the exact slots are flexible, here are some examples. Again, his premium team right now is Venti, Duran, Bennett. Other options include still keeping Bennett because he's a 4-star you probably have and is also on Varka's banner, just a really strong character, alongside another Anemo support, and your second Hexerai choice will be Sucrose if you don't have Venti, with another Pyro like the ones I mentioned earlier. There are a few different examples I'm showing off here, but again, it is very flexible based on what you have. Electro team wise, I really enjoyed Fischl Yansan the most. Cryo team wise, I liked Escoffier Shenhe, but they are both 5 stars, so if you don't have them, you could just use other generic cryos that I showed. And for Hydro, you can do things like double Hydro Farina with either a Hydro or an Anemo healer. You can also technically play Varka in some wheelchair teams like with Columbina Inefa, but these are teams that focus more around them, so I don't recommend them as much from a wanting to maximize your Varka's perspective, but they can work for certain shill content and for just being broken because of how strong Columbina and Inefa are, either with a second Anemo character to buff Varka's damage or with Varka on Verdescent, but I don't want to talk much about it because you can do it, but it doesn't center around Varka. For the most part, I've enjoyed his Pyro teams the most, even without the premium options, as the go-to recommended element. If I were to recommend one to you, it would be Pyro, but the others can work as well, depending on who you have, the content you're doing, and what you feel like playing. All right, now with the team info out of the way, we're gonna get into a DPS showcase of my C0 Varka in the current Spiral Abyss. Now, a few big disclaimers here. Number one, the current Abyss not only doesn't really buff Varka, but also has some unfavorable enemies that are kind of just there for Nodcry and Lunar mechanics, so keep that in mind. And also, while in the video, I did have, for some background footage, Varka's signature weapon because I did choose to pull for it, and it is a solid weapon. For this showcase, I will be using the Serpent Spine R5 as another great option, but without really using his signature, just to keep it more balanced, even though Serpent Spine is really good. Also, I'm going to be using his kind of standard best Pyro team for 2 of the clips in the second half of the Abyss, and then I'll do 1 clip in the first half with a Hydro team because there's an enemy with a Pyro shield, and I want to flex that Varka's other teams can be used when you need a specific element or something like that. And in the second half, on the second floor, the enemies are really annoying, so I don't really want to fight them with Varka if I don't have to. As for my Varka's build, he's on Serpent Spine, signature set, level 9 skill. Again, I could crown it, but I want to showcase it at level 9 first. And he has a solid ratio of basically 100 crit rate when you factor in the 20% you get from the set, 224 crit damage, a good amount of attack inside of Bennett's field with Noblesse, Pyro Resonance, and everything. And he's obviously C0, so I hope you enjoyed the guide, and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. Let's go. And so yeah, overall, as you can see, Varka's a character that I really do like, but wanted to be cautious of. I re-recorded the review section a few times to make it as kind of honest and transparent as possible. I think Varka's cool, but as of right now, not recommended to pull meta-wise. He's not that strong. Hopefully that changes with future supports and stuff, but he's fun to play and to look at. With that said, you definitely can still make him work though, as I tried to showcase, and if there's anything new I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, as always, so be sure to check that. And I'll try to be even faster for future guides, because I know I've been a lot slower than usual recently. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.